The mission to Mars doesn't end with a crash or a breach. For some crew members, it ends quietly in a bunk, staring at a ceiling, somewhere around month 4, when the brain finally runs out of the one thing no spacecraft can carry: the biological conditions that keep a human mind intact. This isn't a failure of courage. It isn't a failure of technology. It's a failure written into the biology of every human who has ever lived, and it will happen to the best crew ever assembled, the same way it would happen to you. And the part that should worry you most isn't that it happens, it's that NASA already knows it's going to happen and built the mission around it anyway. You're 90 days in. The ship is running perfectly. Nobody is sick. The crew trained for years, passed every psychological screen ever invented, and walked into this mission with everything working in their favor. And the quiet, irreversible destruction happening inside every skull on board has nothing to do with any of that. The ship doesn't need to malfunction. Space doesn't need to reach through the hull. The journey itself, the sheer biological impossibility of existing inside a sealed metal box for 7 months, is doing the damage. And here's the question that should follow you for the rest of this video. If the mission architects knew this would happen, why is the most critical task, landing on an alien planet with no rescue option, scheduled at the end of the damage curve, not the beginning? To understand what's breaking, you have to understand what the brain actually needs to function. Your brain wasn't designed in a lab. It was built over millions of years on a planet that moves through specific cycles: sunlight in the morning, darkness at night, temperature shifts between day and evening, seasons that change over months, physical fatigue from moving a body through a real gravitational environment. These aren't luxuries, they're inputs. Your brain's internal clock, the thing that regulates sleep, hormone release, immune function, emotional control, and decision-making, runs on those inputs the way a car engine runs on fuel. Remove the inputs, and the clock doesn't simply slow down, it loses its anchor, it starts drifting. And a brain clock that's drifting doesn't just give you bad sleep. It begins dismantling the systems that keep a human being rational, functional, and emotionally stable. In low Earth orbit, an astronaut experiences 16 sunrises in 24 hours, which means a light-sensitive brain that was built for exactly 1 sunrise per day is getting reset 16 times. That alone is enough to throw the sleep cycle into chaos. But on a transit ship heading to Mars, there are no sunrises at all. The light outside doesn't change. The temperature inside the ship doesn't change. There is no weather, no season, no horizon, no gravitational pull telling the body which direction is down. The brain keeps looking for the signal that says morning and never finds it. It keeps looking for the signal that says safe enough to sleep deeply and never finds that either. Sleep, when it comes, arrives in short fragments, 20 minutes here, 40 minutes there, and it never reaches the deep repair phase the brain requires. That's not just tiredness. Tiredness is what you feel after a long day. This is something structurally different, and it compounds the way unpaid debt does, silently, invisibly, until the account is empty. After 17 days of fragmented sleep, a person's thinking degrades to match someone who hasn't slept at all for 48 hours straight, which means their judgment is as reliable as someone who's been awake for 2 full days with no rest. Now keep adding days. By week 8, the crew isn't just tired. The hormones that only release during deep sleep, the ones that regulate immune function, cellular repair, and emotional stability, have stopped being produced at normal levels. The body's stress chemical, cortisol, which should spike in the morning and drop at night, has no cycle to follow anymore. It stays elevated all the time. Think of it like a car engine that never drops below high rev, not just at highway speed, but idling in your driveway, in traffic, parked overnight. The engine was built to run hard sometimes. It wasn't built to run hard, always. Neither was a human brain. Here is where the chain of failures begins, and each failure makes the next one worse. The sleep breaks down first, not gradually, but in a slow collapse where each night is slightly less restorative than the one before. That permanent stress chemistry that never switches off starts eroding emotional regulation, the thin mental layer that keeps a frightened, exhausted person from reacting like a cornered animal. Small frustrations that would have been ignored in week 1 become genuine conflicts by week 8. NASA data shows that interpersonal conflict between crew members spikes sharply between weeks 8 and 16 of a mission, which means by the time you're halfway to Mars, the social fabric the mission depends on has already begun unraveling. A crew that argued professionally in week 2 is a crew where 2 members have stopped speaking in week 12, and the mission architects knew this before launch. But the failure doesn't stop at interpersonal conflict. As emotional regulation degrades, so does the ability to make decisions under pressure. Not dramatic decisions, the kind you'd notice. Small ones, procedural ones, the ones that keep life support running and navigation accurate. Cognitive test scores for astronauts on long-duration missions drop measurably by month 4, which means the crew performing the highest-stakes tasks of the mission is working with a brain running at significantly less than full capacity. They know it, they feel it, and they can't stop it because the cause isn't stress, or fear, or insufficient training. The cause is the absence of biological inputs that no spacecraft can simulate. The final point in the chain, the moment that can't be walked back, comes somewhere around month 5, when the damage has compounded far enough that even conflict resolution protocols stop working. Rational argument requires a brain that can hold 2 competing ideas simultaneously, weigh them, and choose. By month 5, significant portions of the crew may no longer be reliably doing that. You're still 2 months from landing. The stress chemistry, running continuously, does something else that almost nobody talks about. Cortisol, at permanently elevated levels, suppresses immune function, which means the crew is becoming physically vulnerable to illness at the exact moment they're furthest from any medical help. An infection that would be manageable in a hospital or even in low Earth orbit where evacuation takes hours becomes a serious mission threat when the nearest human assistance is over 100 million kilometers away and the radio signal takes 11 minutes to arrive. The body was built to run its stress system in short bursts and then recover. 7 months with no recovery period isn't an extended burst. It's a slow burn that consumes the reserves the body needs to fight back. The obvious answer is to fix the sleep schedule. Blackout curtains in the sleeping quarters, melatonin supplements, a strict lights-off rule enforced by mission control. Simulate night and day. Give the brain the light cue it needs, and the clock should stabilize. The first part of that reasoning is correct. Simulated darkness does help, and it works well for the first 2 weeks. Studies on astronauts and long-duration shift workers both confirm this. Controlled light exposure does slow the drift, but only for the first 2 weeks. Then the body clock drifts anyway. And here's why. Light is only one of the 5 inputs the brain uses to set its cycle. The others are gravity, social interaction, physical fatigue from real movement through a real environment, and, most critically, a baseline sense of physical safety that the stress system requires before it will allow deep sleep. A transit ship to Mars provides none of these other 4. The light turns off at 10 in the evening ship time. The brain registers the darkness, and then it runs its stress chemistry anyway, because the body is in a fragile metal container surrounded by hard radiation and total vacuum, moving at enormous speed through a void with no rescue option, and no amount of scheduled darkness changes that calculation. Deep, restorative sleep, the kind that actually repairs the damage accumulated during each day, requires a body that feels genuinely safe. Not a body that has been told it's safe. not a body that knows intellectually that the ship's hull is intact. A body that feels at the cellular and hormonal level that the threat has passed and recovery can begin. That signal never comes on a Mars transit. The stress system, the same system that kept your ancestors alive when predators were real and the dark was dangerous, cannot be overridden by mission schedules or meditation protocols or pharmaceutical sleep aids, because those tools work on the top layer of the brain, and the stress system operates several layers below. After 6 weeks without real restorative sleep, the drugs that help in week 2 stop delivering the repair cycle the brain requires. The astronaut falls asleep. They stay asleep. They wake up the same amount of depleted as when they closed their eyes. The darkness isn't the problem. The darkness just reminds the brain how small the ship is. In 2001, Valery Polyakov completed 437 consecutive days aboard the Mir space station, the longest continuous spaceflight in human history. He was selected for extraordinary psychological resilience. He flew with the full support of ground control, with regular communication from Earth, with a rotation of crew members coming and going, which provided the social inputs that a pure transit crew would not have. By the standard of any mission to Mars, his conditions were favorable. Post-mission psychological evaluations documented what the medical team described as significant emotional blunting, social withdrawal, and motivational collapse in the final months of the mission. These are not vague symptoms. Emotional blunting is a measurable reduction in the range and intensity of emotional response, the brain's circuit breaker throwing itself to limit further damage. Social withdrawal in a confined crew is a documented precursor to mission-threatening interpersonal breakdown. Motivational collapse in a mission context means the person responsible for performing tasks stops initiating them. Polyakov made it back to Earth. His post-mission evaluations are among the most detailed records of long-duration space psychology ever compiled. And what they document is exactly the degradation curve that every Mars transit mission will follow, in a man operating under conditions significantly better than a Mars crew will have. He had ground support, he had resupply vehicles, he had a crew that changed. A Mars transit crew has none of those inputs. And Polyakov's mission ended at a station that was still orbiting Earth, not at a landing pad on another planet, requiring the crew to immediately perform the most complex and dangerous task of the entire mission. That is the irony the mission architects live with. The selection process that finds the 6 best, most psychologically resilient, most technically capable human beings on Earth and puts them on that ship guarantees that the worst version of those 6 people is the one that lands on Mars. The degradation is not theoretical. It is documented in every long-duration mission ever flown, in every closed-environment isolation study ever run, in every piece of sleep deprivation research ever published. The engineers who designed the landing procedures built in redundant checklists, not because they thought the crew might be distracted, but because they assumed the crew would be cognitively impaired by month 4 and designed around that assumption. The conflict de-escalation protocols built into the mission schedule exist because the mission architects knew, before the crew ever launched, that rational argument would stop working reliably by month 5. The mission wasn't designed to prevent the breakdown, it was designed to survive it. This is the thing that the story of human spaceflight has never quite said out loud. The human brain is not a machine that can be operated in any environment. It requires specific biological inputs to maintain the functions we treat as baseline sanity. Inputs that took millions of years of evolution to become requirements, not preferences. Gravity, a 24-hour light cycle anchored to a real star. Social interaction with real stakes and real change. Physical fatigue from moving a body through a real world. A stress system that gets to switch off. Remove any of these for long enough and the brain doesn't adapt, it degrades. This is not a problem that money solves, or that better training prevents, or that stronger willpower overcomes. It is a constraint written into biology, and it applies to every human being who has ever attempted long-duration spaceflight and to every human being who ever will. The crew that lands on Mars will be the most cognitively impaired version of themselves at the exact moment they need to perform their most complex, highest-stakes task on an alien planet with no rescue coming and a return window that orbital mechanics set before they ever launched. That isn't a failure of planning. It isn't a failure of the mission architects. It is the specific, documented, unavoidable consequence of putting a human brain in an environment it was not built for, and then asking that brain to function at its best when the environment has been working against it for 7 months. The mission to Mars doesn't end with a crash or a breach. For some crew members, it ends quietly in a bunk, staring at a ceiling somewhere around month 4, when the brain finally runs out of the one thing no spacecraft can carry. And the mission goes on anyway. Because there is no version of this that waits until the biology is solved. There is only this version, the one where the best minds in human history climb into a ship knowing exactly what it will cost them, and go anyway.